decentralization works. I'm not to say that it's perfect, not to say that you're always going to get the outcome that you want, but certainly decentralization of creates systems that are more accountable to the people. I think Thomas Jefferson was right when he said that the only place democracy works is on the local level, where the individual has the greatest say possible over the decisions that are made affecting their lives.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 220. I'm talking to Eric Brakey, who has been a state senator in Maine. He is also currently the president of the Free State Project. His term is expiring, though, in Maine, and he's now going to be soon domicile in New Hampshire. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing well, Chris. It's I've seen you on the platform formerly known as Twitter a few times, and we've never done a show together. So happy to connect with you, and looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah. So, Eric, how did you get into all this?
Into the Liberty Movement?
Yes.
Well, I was a neocon, and that's we all come from somewhere, right? It's humbling to look to when I see people who aren't libertarians today to remind myself how misguided I was at one point. So have a little humility when I meet others. But I grew up watching Fox News and Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity, and what they told me was gospel, especially about the wars. And this was in the early to mid 2000s. And really, I had a brother who became a Ron Paul supporter and sent me his book. And in the Tea Party wave, I started reconsidering certain things about the importance of our Constitution. And eventually, through a lot of internal mental struggle, I broke the chains of my mental prison and saw through the bullshit of the fake Matrix narrative that they try to keep us penned in. And yeah, it was about 2010. I kind of jumped in with both feet into the Ron Paul movement. I realized the wars were evil and I'd been lied to, and many, many good people had been preyed upon. Their virtues had been preyed upon to get us to support doing evil around the world. And I've never forgiven the neocons for that. But I just got started as an activist, like basically when I was just fresh out of college. I was living in New York City. I was working as a professional actor, and I got involved with kind of local grassroots kind of Ron Paul efforts as things were gearing up for the 2012 campaign. Eventually, that led to a job opportunity where I put my kind of acting theater work aside for what I thought was going to be just a little while, temporary, until the campaign was done. But I went up to Maine, where my family roots have been for generations, and we ended up, I became the state director of the campaign there, and we ended up winning the state, taking over the entire state Republican Party, having a big throwdown with the RNC and the Mitt Romney campaign at the national convention that year. And the big takeaway I took from it all was a realization of when we're organized and focused and we know the rules and we have a good strategy, we can win. And we can overtake the establishment, and we can overtake their institutions, and we can use these tools to advance freedom and liberty. So that's kind of been my mission ever since. 2 years after all that, I ran for the state Senate in Maine. I took out a 36-year Democrat incumbent in a 19-point landslide, just out knocking doors and raising money from grassroots folks to get our message out. In the state Senate, I served 2 terms in which this was in 2014 to 2018. I passed constitutional carry in the state of Maine. I overhauled our medical cannabis programs to make them more market-based. I reformed welfare. I passed the first right to try law in New England. And then in 2018, I put that aside. I ran for the United States Senate against and became the Republican nominee in the state of Maine against the incumbent fake independent senator Angus King. That's how I ended up in the Twitter files, actually, because Angus King wasn't happy about the things we were saying about him. And as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I guess he got advice from Peter Schiff, or not Peter Schiff, was
Yeah.
Peter Schiff is the good Schiff, unless
Jacob
you don't
Schiff.
like Shifty Schiff, from California. Was that Adam Schiff? I don't know. Anyway,
Maybe there is Adam Schiff, and of course,
it's
also let's remember the famous tax protester Erwin Schiff, who was Peter's
oh
father,
yeah,
and of course,
yeah.
Spencer Schiff, who is Peter's son, who loves Bitcoin while Peter hates it. But yes, anyway,
Yeah. Anyway, he's not important to the story, but
yeah,
anyway, Angus King went to the Twitter executives and tried to get me and my supporters censored because we were challenging his war propaganda as he was saber rattling for war with Russia. But anyway, so ran for U.S. Senate, didn't win, ran for U.S. Congress 2 years later. Sadly, I didn't win the primary, even though I went into that campaign very strong. After that is when I, in 2020, that was in the midst of COVID, I went down to Young Americans for Liberty, and I was the national spokesperson there, and did a variety of roles there over the course of a year and a half before I came back, took my state Senate seat back in Maine in 2022. I'm finishing up that third term now, but Democrats run everything in the state of Maine now, and they're running a lot of our things into the ground. And I decided that, you know what, 12 years of kind of direct politics is enough for me, at least for right now. And the opportunity to lead the Free State Project came open. And it's amazing for me to see over the course of the last 20 years how this concentration strategy with the Free State Project, this mass migration movement of libertarians from around the liberty diaspora to concentrate in the live free or die state, is having a profound impact on the politics and the culture of New Hampshire, and kind of the creation and establishment of a libertarian homeland. So that's what I'm helping to kind of take into the next generation right now, is inviting people to come and join us in New Hampshire, or at least come to visit to see what's going on up here. And I've been in that role for 9 months now. And it's a great community. I'm very blessed to be working with a lot of good people.
yeah, and you've got two events. You've got Pork Fest, which is always in late June, which is I would call a camp out event, and almost maybe like a libertarian version of Burning Man. And then you've got the Liberty Forum, which is usually in March, which is a little more formal. It's more like a conference. You go to a hotel and you bring in some really good speakers. I've been to both of those. I just wanted to mention both of those because those are both your selling points. I think depending on what you like, you may like one event more than the other, though. But
yeah, they're different. With the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which you mentioned first, right? This is we pitched this as this is our opportunity for you to come and experience for a week what a free society actually looks and feels like. That's what Pork Fest is, as much as it is like a camping festival, as much as there are great talks and everything else. What's really beautiful and unique about it is it's like a pop-up society for a week. And people are engaged in commerce and communion, and it's a great time all around. People from all around the country and the liberty movement pop up at Pork Fest. So if you've never been, you're missing out. But then the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which will be happening in April of next year, this is more academic, more of a traditional conference. But we are in this upcoming year, we are really focusing the New Hampshire Liberty Forum on particular questions around emerging liberty for real societies. What are the challenges that we encounter as we seek to transition into liberty for real societies, and how do we overcome those challenges? So those challenges could range from anything like I know we've got a guy who wants to write a paper and present on how we establish real cybersecurity in a liberty for real society with the CIA and the FBI and all of our adversaries in the Washington power structure having more power than ever to access our data, right? That's an interesting question. I'm looking at putting in doing a discussion on tax nullification. How do we defeat this system where the federal government, takes our money and ransoms it back to us with strings attached to get states to dance to their tune? And I know a young woman who wants to do a talk about how do we do better matchmaking and pairing for relationships, as we try to, have liberty families. So all things are kind of on the table as long as it's dealing with a problem solution for emerging liberty for real societies. So those are both great opportunities to come out and experience the Free State in April and in June of next year. People can learn more. All of those events are listed at our website, fsp.org. But I will also note that we have events in our community going on basically every day in New Hampshire. If you or someone in your audience wanted to experience New Hampshire and you just like picked a week to come and visit and do a porcupine vacation, I guarantee you that you'll get a really great taste of the community and all the events that are going on.
Yeah, and especially as I've told people regarding Pork Fest, if you make your lodging plans by December at the latest, because things fill up and it's just not always easy to find a place if you're not going to camp out. But they may even sold out the campsites by now, because all that sells out pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, there's plenty of campsites available at this point in time, and there's usually there's a motel that right there on site at Rogers Campground that. There's still plenty of time. I mean, I don't want people shouldn't wait, but but there's plenty of time. And I know that some people rent Airbnbs in the area. There are surrounding hotels in the area too. I personally think the best experience is to get a campsite and like camp on Rogers. But camping's not for everyone. Some people want access to a bed.
Yeah, and even though the one time I went, it was actually a pretty cool week. It still doesn't necessarily have to be that hot in New Hampshire. It's not like Florida or Texas.
Oh yeah, we have mild summers.
Yeah, one thing I've wondered about too, and I suggested this when I was at the Liberty Forum. I would think New Hampshire possibly figure out a way to maybe get outside the regulations and maybe actually set up what I would call a healthcare haven there. I mean, like a place where people end up going for cheaper surgeries or cheaper optional procedures. I would think that would be something that you could get a major demand for. And also because, they wouldn't have to go to a foreign country for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the Free State is whatever you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Whatever area you want to work to expand freedom in, the support and the human resources are here. If you want to come and build it, the people are here to help you build it. So I couldn't tell you specifically what's going on right now in terms of if anyone is pioneering that. I know that direct primary care is a big thing. I mean, that's not exactly what you're talking about, but yes. I do think that direct primary care is like one of the great ways to initially start to opt out of this kind of this corporate government collusion of a healthcare system. Actually, when I ran for Congress, my plan for kind of healthcare reform was kind of front and center and what I thought needed to be tackled. Of course, I was proposing how you kind of go into the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. and unravel certain things. But I've always thought that just like the model that we're applying to education, which is, look, if tax dollars are going into this system already, the question is, should we be funneling the tax dollars into a massive bureaucracy, or should we be empowering people by putting the dollars into their hands to direct kind of the education of their kids? I think the same could be said for healthcare. I mean, I chaired our Health and Human Services Committee in Maine for 4 years. I got a really first-hand look at just how broken healthcare is. And one of the biggest drivers of that is the Medicaid system itself.
Yes.
Which is, look, I understand that we want to help people who are not capable of affording health care as it is, but the way we do it, right, we take so much money from the taxpayers to the government, we hand it to the hospital. It's like it's an entire third party apparatus, right? And it's I mean, you can make a similar critique of the insurance companies themselves, but I always go back to what Milton Friedman talked about, right? Is that there's different ways to spend money. You can
Yeah.
spend your money on yourself. You can spend your money on someone else. You can spend someone else's money on yourself, or you can spend someone else's money on someone else. And the best outcomes are when you're spending your money on yourself, right? That's the ideal. But the
Yeah.
worst outcome is when you're spending someone else's money on someone else, because you aren't directly affected by the outcome of the quality of the care that's being received, and you don't really care how much it costs because it's not your money. And that's Medicaid, right? The people making the decisions are completely disconnected from both the cost and the quality, and so we get the worst of everything.
Well,
But so
yeah. Well, try, if you go in for a procedure, an appointment, try even asking them, how much is this going to cost?
oh
Try
yeah,
try asking them that and see. They're like, what does that mean? How much does it cost? Well, I don't understand. It's
yeah, right. The system is
and when somebody asks how much something costs, the answer is a dollar, any number. There is no other answer, or the answer is I don't know. And of course you could say it's about that. Yeah, it's
yeah, it
yeah,
is it's a system that is right, like all systems are built to serve their customers,
yeah,
right? And the problem in healthcare is that patients are not the customers. The
yeah, exactly,
customers
yeah.
are massive third-party bureaucracies,
Oh yeah,
and so it's their needs that get catered to
yeah,
because, right? It's the second golden rule. He
yeah,
who has the gold makes the rules, right?
yeah,
And so we've given all the gold to the insurance companies, and we've given all the gold to the Medicaid and Medicare bureaucracies, and
yes,
so the system is built for them.
yeah. And well, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, so let's get back on topic. Eric, one thing I've also noticed, obviously, your things didn't work out in Maine, but I'm definitely realizing that the smaller states are not nearly as dysfunctional as the big states in America. What can you say about that? Since you were in a state with less, you were in Maine, which has less than 2 million people. I live
Yep.
in Texas, which is
Well,
now the second most populated state in the country.
yeah. I mean, decentralization works. I'm not to say that it's perfect, not to say that you're always going to get the outcome that you want, but certainly decentralization of uh, creates systems that are more accountable to the people. I think Thomas Jefferson was right when he said that the only place
Yeah,
democracy works is on the local level, where the
yeah,
individual has the greatest say possible over the decisions that are made
yeah.
affecting their lives. Um,
Well, yeah. You ran for Senate. How many people were? How many people did you represent as a senator?
um, my district is about 40,000 people.
Okay.
And as far as like in terms of voters, like if I got 10,000 votes, that would usually
Yeah.
mean I won the race.
I mean, so I'm just thinking, how many people nowadays even to get into the Texas Senate? I think it's what? Oh, geez.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
I would.
hundreds of thousands to be a state rep in Texas now. It's completely removed from the people, and I know in New Hampshire it's less than 4,000.
Well, New Hampshire is a unique situation because at least the House of Representatives has 400 members
Yeah.
for a state with 1.3 million people. So it's like one of the largest legislative bodies in the world.
Yes.
And But I like it. I mean, it's almost like it feels a little bit more like a convention than a traditional legislature, but a convention that's going on for you know, for the greater part of a year. So, but it's, you know, it's interesting, right? New Hampshire doesn't have a referendum process like a lot of other states, right? But the House of Representatives is so accessible to the average person
Mhm.
that it is one of the more you could say Democratic bodies, small d Democratic bodies in the country. So and the House of Representatives in New Hampshire is at this point in time a quarter. The composition is a quarter libertarian. People
Yes.
run as Republicans for the most part.
Yeah.
Though there have been some Liberty Democrats Free Staters who've run as Democrats in the past and got elected, but nowhere in the country you're going to see a concentration of libertarians in the legislature like you see in New Hampshire, and that's a big part of why New Hampshire is leading on school choice. New Hampshire, the House of Representatives there became the first lower chamber in the country to pass Defend the Guard legislation, and there's many kind of innovations in liberty policy that are taking place in New Hampshire. I could go on all day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really understand why this is effective, because there's somebody, a somewhat prominent libertarian, who once tweeted out a while ago. She said, I'd like to see a free state project in Mississippi. I'd like to see a free state project in Alabama. And I called her out. I said, "What are you talking? That's not going to work."
Right.
It's like,
right.
It's.
Right, because the whole idea is concentration in one place, and you start saying we're going to concentrate everywhere, right? Well, it's like, well, then we're not concentrating.
Yeah, you're not concentrating. The whole point is you have limited numbers. And Eric, is it also getting to a point? Is it also getting to a point where some people who who don't believe in this are actually throwing up their hands, just saying, "I'm out of here"? Do you hear stories of that now? I mean, the socialists do they go over to Vermont and
to some degree? I mean, some of them haven't read the writing on the wall yet, but yeah, I mean, that is part of the goal, right? Is that look, I mean, at one point in time, Vermont was the most Republican state in the country, and what happened there? What happened there was basically the kind of mirror image of what we're doing in New Hampshire. There was a kind of a socialist state project where socialists from around the country decided, they picked Vermont. They said, we're going to go here and we're going to make it a socialist state. That's how Bernie Sanders landed in Vermont, right? He was from New York. He came he came in with this movement of socialists into Vermont, and they took over the state. And they turned it into they went from being like the most Republican state in the country to being the most socialist state in the country, with the openly socialist United States senator and Bernie Sanders. And frankly, I mean, and now there's some of our best kind of liberty activists are people who fled places like Vermont and said, it's not working here. We're gonna build what we want to see here in New Hampshire. Now, what helps in New Hampshire is we are not, unlike the socialists who changed Vermont, we're not really changing New Hampshire in the sense of New Hampshire's always been the live free or die state. Like, this is the ethic of New Hampshire. It has a libertarian ethic and culture. It is the progressives in New Hampshire who have been trying to change what the Granite State is. And so we're coming in as, I suppose, reinforcements for a lot of the kind of the native liberty-loving Granite Staters, and we're helping to. We've amplified kind of the underlying dynamic in New Hampshire. New Hampshire now is ranked the #1 state for freedom in America, and it is also like the only. Not to say that like Republican versus Democrat counts for a whole lot, though it does mean something depending on what kinds of Republicans you have elected. But it is revealing that New Hampshire is the only state in New England that has a Republican governor, Republican Senate, and Republican House of Representatives. It's everything else around us is blue, and I think that part of that is people leaving states like Vermont and Massachusetts and New York and Maine, because they recognize to some degree that their states are lost, but we can build a free society here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's I certainly I know what you're saying about that. Of course, I also point out New Hampshire is still the only state that's never had a seatbelt law.
Yes.
That was the big trend back in the 80s, and largely it was put in because oh, we'll give you federal funds if you pass the seatbelt law. New Hampshire never took the bait on that. You know, Eric, that is something though that does worry me, because living here in Austin, Texas, I've said to people, if I wanted to live in California, I would have moved there. Well, California is here. And you know, that's one thing I do worry about New Hampshire, is how, you know, you have people say, well, I'm going to go to New Hampshire because there's so much more opportunity there. And yet they don't understand why New Hampshire is prosperous. You know, how do you avoid that? Because, you know, years ago, there was this person who I think wrote a letter to the editor, you know, it's something like, I voted for every park. I voted for everything that tried to make Austin a great place to live. And then they said, I can't afford to live here anymore. You know, how do you know, because a lot of these people, they go and they destroy the next place, and then they wonder why it, you know, before they moved in, it was nice. And then they moved in and it became terrible. And then they don't understand why. And then they go to another town and do the same thing. How does New Hampshire keep from that happening? Maybe just because they keep bringing in the right people, or what?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I think that, well, let me lay out three things that can help with that. The first is making sure that we have a very strong established brand for New Hampshire, so that there is a self-selection on the people who move here. Not to say that everyone is going to come, but like the more we can emphasize the live free or die brand of New Hampshire and make it very clear in people's minds that like this is the libertarian state, like this is where you're going to have like gun toting, like, you know, you're not coming here for the welfare programs, because we're not handing out the welfare. If you're uncomfortable with seeing people open carry like guns and that there are guns everywhere, then this isn't the place for you, right? These are the kinds of things with kind of our branding and our culture, we can kind of create a positive self-selection in the right direction of the kinds of people who move here, because we want it to be like, I would ideally, I want New Hampshire to be the kind of place where if a liberal tells their liberal friends they're moving to New Hampshire, that their liberal friends look at them like, what's wrong with you? Like, are you just like a gun toting, like anti-government extremist? Like, you're going to New Hampshire, right? Texas to some degree has that kind of reputation, though Texas doesn't always live up to that reputation. But I will say, you know, I can't, I mean, I did live in Austin, Texas for a little while, yeah, and I do like the city. But I will say, as far as Texas goes, I think I've seen numbers that suggest, though, that the people who are moving to Texas from California, by and large, on average, are more conservative than the average Texan.
Maybe so, yeah. I haven't really,
because people are making a conscious choice when they think, yeah, Texas. They're like, there's the idea of Texas. The reality doesn't always live up to the idea. And then there are the people who are coming. They want to turn, yeah, Texas blue, and they're pushing their progressive evangelism and trying to submerge the entire country into 1,000 years of darkness by turning Texas blue. That is something they're trying to do. But so for New Hampshire, if we can really emphasize our brand as a live free or die state, if we can do emphasize parts of the libertarian culture that make people who love big government uncomfortable to the point where they don't want to be here, right? Gun culture is a big part of that. I think school choice is a big part of that. That's all well and good. And then institution building. I mean, I think one of the great things about the liberty movement here in New Hampshire that I have not seen anywhere else is the level of institution building with organizations like the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance that are like volunteer based, but they're actively working the state legislature, yes, and with the state legislators there, to the homeschool co-ops that are being built up across the state, to just the overall culture and community that's being established here. Those are three ways we help keep New Hampshire free.
Yeah, it also looks like you have a lot of good cryptocurrency people there as well.
Oh yes, yeah. New Hampshire, I like to call it, it's the cradle of cryptocurrency. It's not like necessarily where the first Bitcoin transaction took place, but it is like in the early days of Bitcoin, like this was a real hub for kind of people who are evangelists of crypto and Bitcoin and demonstrating use cases. Um, I feel like in America, probably like New Hampshire and Wyoming are like the two leading states in the crypto sphere.
Yeah. Are you, is it mostly people in the Northeast that are coming to the Free State Project, or is it becoming more all over?
People come from all over. I mean, it is, I couldn't give you off the top of my head, like kind of the exact breakdowns of everything. It's easier for people to move from closer. I meet
Yeah.
a lot of people who move from Massachusetts or New York State. But just the other month, I was helping to move into uh, an apartment here in Dover, a guy who came all the way from California with his U-Haul. So people are coming from all over, and not just from around the country, but around the world.
Yeah. What are you doing? Because I think around the world is definitely a something you might want to look at. Obviously Canadians. Although I've heard also there's I guess they got something going on in New Brunswick too, called the Free Province Project or something like that. Because obviously it's a lot harder to move across the national boundary. But if I was in a foreign country somewhere, obviously it depends on. Okay, let's say I'm in a foreign country that speaks English. I want to move to the Free State Project. How hard or easy would that be? I mean, this is not immigration advice. This is not legal advice.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whatever your legal pathway is to get here, if you love
Yeah.
liberty, we would encourage you to make New Hampshire your final destination. We joke sometimes that like we're not for we are for open borders for libertarians, right?
Yes.
We're not for open borders for non-libertarians. So, however you get here, if you actually believe in liberty and you're not someone who's coming expecting, a free welfare check, you're not someone coming here expecting other people to take responsibility for you. I mean, plug into a community and communities help each other, certainly, but we don't care where you come from as long as you share the underlying ethical values of liberty.
Yeah. Is there also I know of also one other thing that's like the Free State Project. I don't know if have you heard of Monte Libero?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
It's a Free State Project in Montenegro. I think it's mostly Russians, but
Okay.
and I think they figure, well, we won't go all the way to the U.S., but we'll try to a Free State Project in Europe. So, and it's about 1 million, so that was why they picked Montenegro. But I don't. And also, I think Eric, maybe you don't want to talk about this, but do you think eventually New Hampshire will get to the point where they nullify or even say we're leaving? I don't know if that's
Well, I'm a big believer in nullification.
yeah.
There are folks in the Free State movement who are advocates of peaceful secession. I'm not really sold on that, but I think that conversation and dialogue and these sorts of things is healthy and productive. So I'm not one of these people who comes out and says, you can't talk about that. You're embarrassing us by talking about radical things. I enjoy discussions on radical ideas, even if I'm not sold on them as that they're the best strategy. I do think that states have a right to secede. I think that our country was built on the idea of secession. I mean, that's what the Declaration of Independence was a secessionist document. One of the best ones ever written. So, but I want to nullify the power of the federal government. I want to get kind of back to Article 1, Section 8 is like the limited scope of their powers, and I think that we are on a path to do that. We have nullified several things, including federal gun laws, and of course I mentioned defend the guard. The House, the New Hampshire is threatening to bring our National Guard troops home from wars that haven't been declared by Congress. So there's a lot that's happening on the 10th Amendment front. Some people have visions of a totally free New Hampshire.
Yes.
I worry about what that looks like in terms of lack of access to free trade with the other 49 states of the union. I do think that we benefit
Yes.
from that as much as we, and we could say we want to engage in free trade with all of them, but I think that we know that generally, I imagine we would become the target of many kind of protectionist policies and on
Yes.
probably in retaliation for leaving, right? A bitter ex
Yeah.
spouse says you don't divorce me and get to get to
Well,
have access to my markets. Um,
yeah. And if you leave, what does Maine do? That's another thing because of the
Hopefully Maine
geography.
would leave with us, or at
Yeah.
least the second district. I've been an advocate for the second district of Maine breaking away and joining New Hampshire personally, but um,
There are a lot of movements like that. Various movements to there's the Eastern Oregon wants to join Idaho and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Greater Idaho Movement. I just had the executive director of that program on my weekly podcast, the Porcupine Report. We had a great conversation about it for those who are interested.
It's yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting. It does help that New Hampshire, of course, does have water. I don't know if you can really go it alone if you don't have access to water. So you can get goods in and out of New Hampshire, but yeah, that would create some difficulties. Erica, since you said you were from New York City, you said, and then you were
Well, as I'm
why?
from New York City, I spent a few years there
Okay,
after college.
okay. Why has New England just become so horrible? Otherwise, I mean, arguably, it's easily the worst. Maybe except for the West Coast, it's the worst place in America to live. I don't think there's much question about that anymore. I mean, outside of New Hampshire, of course, and I would even New England, but also I'd throw in New York and New Jersey. They're all just shitholes,
Hmm.
in my
Uh,
view.
Politically speaking, well, I mean, I
Yeah,
would say I think that there's a dichotomy in New England in terms of the
yeah,
politics, in that you have, I think you could probably trace it all the way back to the Puritans. But
yeah,
you do have, particularly in like northern New England, rural Maine, rural New Hampshire, you do have, I would say, a natural strain of libertarianism that is, I think, one of the best natural
yeah,
strains of libertarianism, of like, the kind of libertarianism where, um, you know, we love our guns. We don't want to boss people around in their
yeah,
personal lives. You leave me alone, and so I think that's where you get kind of a libertarian strain that is like, you go do your gay marriage. Fuck it, fuck if I care, right? But don't take my money. Don't touch my stuff. Don't like, I don't know, like, so the liberty movement up here, I think in New England is great. But you also have, right, you could say the other end of the political spectrum in New England, which is embodied by people like Elizabeth Warren, right?
the
This,
Kennedys, yeah,
yeah, or this, it's not just like right, and this is where kind of it traces back to the Puritans, right? It might not be
yeah,
a Christian evangelism, but there's this envisioning of, we are the saviors of the world, and we know better than everyone else. And oh, you it's very kind of paternalistic, and yeah, I mean, there's always been this kind of strain in New England of imagining, we are the chosen people, and we are going to kind of control the world
yeah,
and direct the world, and a certain kind of, and also like a bandwagon of like always like jumping on the new thing, but and then having a moral superiority about it. Um, and I'm trying to
yeah.
remember. Andrew Heaton did a great podcast kind of breaking this down on his show, The Political Orphanage, a while back. I don't know if you know him. He explained it
I
very
don't know
well.
him, but it is interesting too, because especially Massachusetts, when you look at the history of, it's never really had a free market in schools, even going back to the Puritans, Horace Mann, and some of these other people. It is a very unfortunate history there, with Massachusetts especially. although the Boston Tea Party and different things like that. But yeah, I think the one that really shocks me the most is Rhode Island, just because of how Rhode Island was founded and the way it got started. Because Rhode Island was really these people who had been thrown out of Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they said, okay, we're going to have a separation of church and state here, which had never been done, and it was done before Pennsylvania. But now Rhode Island is just completely went down the path of, I mean, it's as socialist as the rest of them. But yeah, that's the one that gets me, and of course, I still like to think about, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. Incidentally, another thing too is you ever talk to anybody in the Second Vermont Republic, or is that movement dead?
I don't know much about that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
All I know is 20 years ago, Killington, Vermont, voted to break away and join New Hampshire. And they're still being held hostage to this day.
Yeah. Well, the Second Vermont Republic was really just about leaving the Union too, and it was. I remember one time, like I was watching this conversation. One guy, it was Thomas Naylor of the Second Vermont Republic, and there was another guy from the League of the South, and they couldn't agree on it. They couldn't agree on anything, but they both agreed we hate Washington D.C. It was really, they're just kind of like, and they seemed like, yeah, we'll just, they both were on the. So it's kind of funny, New Hampshire. I'm also curious. What was New Hampshire ever? One thing I will say for New England, though, is it was somewhat of a hotbed of anti-slavery activity too, I believe.
Oh yeah. This is where the abolition movement really got formally organized. It's where the Republican Party was born, around abolition. I mean, we can have many historical debates about how that went about, and I'm a skeptic on the mythologizing of the Civil War and how it's presented. Though certainly, well, when you say that, you always want to disclaim. Though I think that the abolition of slavery was very much a good thing, right?
Yes.
I don't want to be misinterpreted, but certainly I don't know that the erection of and the establishment of basically the nation state. That's kind of was one of the end results of the Civil War was basically the death of federalism and the establishment of the nation state.
I do also want to remind people, there were some of the more radical abolitionists said, well, we should leave the Union and not support this. They were actually, I got to ask too, who are some people from New Hampshire that you think Americans should know more about?
Well,
or people from Maine, anybody from Maine for that matter too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a better Maine historian than I am a New Hampshire historian, though. I will say, what I'm trying to remember the name of the U.S. Secretary of State who was from New Hampshire, who predicted that the day would come when the states needed to interpose between their national guards and arbitrary use by the federal government. So anyway, with the Defend the Guard effort, that was very prophetic. But I'm a big fan of in history. Rather than talking about people, I'll talk about events that I think are forgotten in our American history, and particularly with the American Revolution in both Maine and New Hampshire. Now, in New Hampshire, people, everyone learns a narrative about the American Revolution that's very like Massachusetts centric, right? It started at Lexington and Concord when the first shots were fired, right? But folks in New Hampshire will tell you, actually, before that, there were the Pine Tree riots, in which, and this is kind of where it really got going, where, people forget the pine tree as a symbol of liberty in New England. And this is why the pine tree is on the Appeal to Heaven flag, right? The British king had claimed ownership of all the pine trees in New England. And it was illegal to cut down a pine tree for use other than for the king's use. And they used these pine trees to build masts for their ships. And it was they needed it for their navy. in New Hampshire, at a certain point in the build up to the American Revolution, they told the king, "Fuck you. We're going to cut down our pine trees and use our pine trees." And I'm still learning the whole history of the pine tree riot there. I couldn't explain it as well as others, but there was a parallel story in Maine. Now, this is right after the Battle of Lexington and Concord. They call it the Battle of Machias. It was the first naval battle of the American Revolution. And what happened was in Machias, Maine, which is was a little settlement. It's a bigger city now, but still not very big. But it's like on the coast, kind of in down east Maine. So like if you're looking at Maine and you think of it like it's almost like a little like a glove, it's like the thumb on the coast of the thumb jutting out into the sea, into the coast there in the Gulf of Maine.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they were a logging community, and they depended on trade with the British. But after Lexington and Concord, they told them, we're not selling you our pine trees anymore. So the British sent up 3 ships, 2 trade vessels, and a warship. Carrot and the stick. Say, oh, you are gonna trade with us again, and we can do this the easy way or the hard way. But the local Sons of Liberty chapter in Machias had organized, and rather than submit, they charged the ships with their axes and pitchforks, and the British folks on board with their pistols got one shot off, but by the time they were reloading for the second shot, the battle was done. They were overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of these Maine people, and they commandeered those ships. They made it they made their own little 3-ship navy, and they renamed them. One of them was called the Machias Liberty, and then they went around patrolling, attacking British supply lines, stealing more ships, and building a bigger navy. And they became such a huge thorn in the side of the British. The British got so upset with this little community of Machias, they went back a second time to try to defeat them. This time, the local folks had allied with the native tribes, and they rebuffed them. The British couldn't stop them, so the British instead went to Portland, Maine, and burned it to the ground. And so we joke in Maine that the British, in that case, revealed they weren't all that bad. For burning Portland to the ground. Anyway, but anyway,
Yes.
this is a great historical event. I think in the fight for kind of American independence, comes out of kind of Maine,
Yeah.
and the Pine Tree Riot out of New England, and it was fought over our pine trees, and that's why the pine tree is a great forgotten symbol of American liberty. And it's nice to see it kind of getting a resurgence in popularity with the appeal to Heaven Flag.
Yes, and let's remember too, New Hampshire and Maine are both absolutely beautiful states. I put the Pacific Northwest ahead of the head of the Northeast, but yeah, they're still really pretty places to go visit. I did want to ask, who are the biggest haters of the Free State Project right now?
Progressives who are losing.
Mhm.
In particular, there's a former Democratic state senator in New Hampshire who I think she got voted out of office some number of years back. She runs this organization called like Granite State Matters, where they basically like compile enemies lists of like free staters. Like this is literally like the first thing I got the job. I'm coming over here and like this like public enemies list. They've like compiled like dossiers on every free stater that they can. Though I will say the information is pretty spotty and sometimes hilariously inaccurate. Um, so yeah, the progressives in New Hampshire hate the Free State movement because it is the reason why New Hampshire is not a progressive hellhole like all the states around us.
Yes, and of course I naturally got to ask, what about Dartmouth and UNH? What do the professors say? I bet they hate it too.
I haven't gone there and interviewed any of them. Who knows? I mean, maybe some free staters have managed to infiltrate those institutions. We want to do a long march through the institutions, just like the communists did. We need to reverse that with a libertarian march through the institutions. I don't know. I know that there was a great debate at Dartmouth College between David Hogg and Spike Cohen on gun rights a few months back, and that's where our good friend Lily Tang Williams, who just won the Republican primary in the 2nd District of New Hampshire for Congress, she famously asked David Hogg, can you guarantee to me, as he's advocating for gun control, can you guarantee to me that the government won't become tyrannical? And he says, well, of course I can't guarantee that. Of course, he's the one saying, oh, Donald Trump is such a tyrant and it's all, whatever. So of course he can't guarantee that. And she said, all right, well, then the debate is settled. I'm not giving up my guns.
Yes, and German. I was born and raised in communist China. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Let's talk about Lily Tang. She's running for Congress, and that's there are 2 congressional districts, and this is the district I believe that's more the west and the north, I think, or
yeah. It's in New Hampshire. You can think of the congressional districts as the West District and the East District.
Yeah, but the East has maybe more of the more concentrated area. Is Manchester in the East or in the West?
I'm still getting
Okay.
to know the lay of the land in New Hampshire. It's funny going from being like an expert on all things Maine politics to having to learn a totally new state.
One other person I really liked, although I don't know what he's been doing lately. I really liked Bob Hall when he was your senator, and that was even really when the Free State Project was just getting started off the ground. If you remember Bob Hall, the senator.
Not really. I could tell you all about Maine senators.
Yeah.
I am very much a transplant to New Hampshire who's still getting to know all the history.
Well, Bob Hall was he had really good ratings from organizations like Gunners of America, and
yeah,
he was in the. Trying to look him up again. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. That name's common as dirt, as you can imagine.
Yeah. But it was interesting when the Free State Project got established in New Hampshire. The governor of New Hampshire was actually invited the Free State Project to New Hampshire. There was a big competition between states for where.
Actually, no, it wasn't Bob Hall. It was Bob Smith. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, an even more common name.
Bob Smith. Yeah, but yeah, Bob Smith. He was yeah. Why was I thinking Bob Hall? Well, there's a really good guy in Texas named Bob Hall, but yeah, Bob Smith. He was Senate from 1990 to 2002.
Yeah,
two terms. Yeah, he was. I don't know what he's been doing since then, but yeah, he was. Yeah. Well, he went independent, ran for president, then he quit. So it was but he's getting up there now. He's in his 80s, but yeah, he was a good guy. Yeah. Yeah, you were also doing some things to protest. Well, you weren't in New Hampshire at the time, so yeah. But New Hampshire is also. Are there any? I know there's no sales tax, no property or no income tax, but are the property taxes fairly high? I mean, how do they get you up there?
So there's no income tax, no sales tax, and the folks in the legislature have been actively cutting the budgets and trying to keep the taxes low. Property taxes are a significant tax that you pay in New Hampshire, though it varies a lot because property taxes are ultimately, there's a lot of determination made on the local level about property tax rates. So in some ways it's a decentralized tax and you kind of get to pick if you want higher property taxes or lower property taxes based on what community you choose to live in. I'm moving to Dover, which probably I haven't done a comparison of it versus a lot of the other ones, but I imagine the property taxes are higher than a lot of other places in New Hampshire. Though I will say, coming from Maine, we complain about high property taxes there too, and we also have one of the highest income taxes in the country, and a moderate sales tax on top of that. So I'd rather just have the one I've got to deal with. But also, I will say, kind of one of the ways that the New Hampshire budget is paid for too is liquor sales. New Hampshire maybe this isn't my favorite thing about how it's structured, but like the state runs all the liquor stores. Um, so I mean, I guess maybe I prefer that to an income tax. but uh, but yeah, so no income tax and no sales tax is very nice though.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know. It seems like things are pretty functional there. I sometimes I wonder. Texas. I don't have an income tax, but it's still. But sometimes it seems like it's just a mess. One thing that's become something I talk about a lot lately is the fact that Texas doesn't have crowns on the roads. So you can be driving along and there's standing water on the road because you every other state you make the middle of the road about 6 inches higher, and the water just
Mm.
flows right off, but not Texas, no thing. But yeah, so yeah, it seems like you gotta other I mean, if it wasn't for the winter, New Hampshire would definitely be higher on my list.
Well,
Yeah.
I personally like living in a place with all four seasons. And I always like to say when people bring up the winter, it does mean that we have plentiful groundwater. We're like the Saudi Arabia of water up here. So if when the water wars happen, which I know they're already happening in places
Mhm.
like California, this is the place where you're not going to have to worry about that.
That's true. Yeah, it's anything else you think that makes New Hampshire special or yeah.
Yeah. Well, really, at the end of the day, the thing that makes it the most special is the people and the
Yeah.
community. And I mean, I will tell you, as a former performing artist, like actor,
Yeah.
who gave that up to get into politics, I've always dreamed about doing that again. And but the deeper I got into politics, the harder it was to do because theater communities
Oh
are
yeah.
not even just left of center; they're like left of Mao. um, so certainly it became harder and harder to come back to those communities. Before, I could kind of keep my head down and keep my politics to myself. But
Yeah.
coming to New Hampshire, it's like, you can basically build kind of whatever group you want, whatever niche interest you have with this concentration of people who share liberty values. Um, if you want to have a club that you just sit around and talk about
Yeah.
Murray Rothbard all day, you could do that. But you could also like things outside of politics. So
Yeah.
we did a really fun stage reading of a play I've wanted to hear for a while called William Shakespeare's Star Wars: Verily a New Hope. Um, and
Yeah.
but those are the kinds of fun events you can do. But there's crypto
Yeah.
groups, there's knitting
Oh
groups,
yeah.
there's whatever you dream of, and if it's not here, you can build it.
Why do you think so many actors are on the left?
Well, I think part of it is just the culture of the industry, and I think
Yeah.
that there's also probably I know there are a lot of people who um, don't have these ideas, but just the power structures are such that they
Okay.
have to keep quiet about it because I mean, as an actor in particular, like you're literally dependent on other people picking you, in a sea
Yeah.
of oftentimes hundreds of people they could pick from, right? And if those people in charge have political agendas, that's a big factor. So,
Yes.
um, but I think there's also just something about like, you know, part of being a good actor is developing a strong sense of empathy, and I think
Hmm.
that sometimes that empathy without logic can kind of lead to just having a really big heart and really small brain when it comes to many of the problems that we face, not thinking through kind of the systems that we're building and just thinking we need to give out everything to everyone. So
Yeah.
this is
I
just speculation, but that's what I've observed.
Eric, that is extremely profound, and the empathy without logic is really something I just wow, that's true, and it does apply to some of these people, and because I took acting classes here in Austin, and this was back in 2005, and I will say at least among the Texas actors, I'd say about 1/3 of them I would call conservative, but the one thing that just comes out of all that is just this memory of I've never been with a group of people who treated me better. at the time. I said, I really feel like I'm a person here. And it was just, wow. It's, Eric, there's something else too. I got to confess, even though I've never lived on the West Coast, I am a lifelong Laker fan. And you are in Celtic country.
I will say
one of the greatest rivalries in sports,
Well,
but Johnson and Bird can be best friends. We can be friends too.
Well, and I will say I'm a little at a disadvantage here. I was the black sheep in my family, 4 boys, and they were all into basketball, and I just, sports was not my thing.
Yeah.
So I like to when people bring up sports, I like to make jokes that about pretending that I know what I'm talking about. Basketball, huh? That's the one where they hit the puck into the hoop, right?
Well, I assume most people, I suspect most people in New Hampshire are Boston fans, at least in sports.
Yeah.
It's and Boston, they do love their sports in Boston. I mean, that's one thing. When I go to Logan, it's cool to see all those banners on the all the teams that have won championships.
It is a big part of the culture up here. I mean, the New England Patriots. Everyone. There's a strong. There's a strong sense of those Boston teams.
Yeah, I think. Well, it's the only one that's called New England. Not they used to call them the Boston Patriots, but now they're the New England Patriots.
Yeah.
Whether it be the Red Sox, the Celtics, or the Bruins.
Yeah. There's a strong. They really try to have a strong sense of regional identity with it.
Yeah, they do. It's it's. Well, you said you had about an hour, so I think and not to mention Boston has, if you go to Boston, you got to go get the seafood. It's I also got to say too, when I was in Boston, it seemed like it was a much nicer than a lot of the big American cities I've been in. It just seemed like it was clean. I didn't see people out on the street asking for money as much. Maybe I was just in the right places, but it seemed a lot more functional than other big American cities. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I would compare it now.
This was 3 years ago, but yeah.
I enjoy going down there when there's an event to go down to.
Yeah, well, one thing,
much time there.
If you're going to New Hampshire, you can fly into Manchester, but that will often involve a plane change. But coming from Austin, I could just go straight to Boston. And granted, it's an hour drive to Manchester, but it ends up being about the same time.
Yep.
So you can fly into Manchester, but you'll have more flying options into the Boston airport. And I don't hate that airport like so many people do. It seems like a decent enough airport. So
yeah, that's kind of what I like about where I'm getting situated in Dover, New Hampshire, is that there's three major airports within an hour of where I am. You've got Manchester, you've got Boston, and you've got Portland. So kind of at the crossroads of all three. So a lot of options. What's that?
How much goes in and out of Portland, Maine, though? It's not that neither one's that big an airport, but it's not that big an airport, is it?
I mean, it's not as big as Boston, but at least it was the primary airport that for the last 10 years as I've been more situated in Maine and needing to fly to events around the country. It's been the primary airport I've gone out of, but you're certainly going to get more direct flights out of Boston.
Yeah, in Boston, you can also get the international flights. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was what was your favorite part of this, Eric?
What is this, a Michael Malice interview?
Some Malice asks that, so I figured out, maybe I should ask that. Makes my guests feel better. It's just something I'm experimenting with.
I enjoy talking about history. I enjoy talking about the Battle of Machias, and I will and I enjoyed the opportunity to tell people about upcoming events like the Porcupine Freedom Festival and the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. And I will, to any of you who are watching, I would strongly encourage you to go to fsp.org to sign up for our newsletter, check out our big upcoming events, and you can even check out our community calendar there, which has the list of all of the public events that are taking place in the Free State community There's basically something happening every single day in New Hampshire. So anytime you come up to visit, there's something happening for you, an opportunity to connect with Liberty community on the ground here. And I'll also mention, if people watching like podcasts, which I imagine they do because they're watching a podcast, that I've got my own show every week. We release a new episode every Wednesday at 7 called The Porcupine Report. It's on all of our Free State Project social media platforms and Spotify and Apple and
Yes.
all of that.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, that's great. I don't know if you had anything else to say before we go.
That's it.
No, keep up the good work, Eric. Yes, fsp.org is the Free State Project. And I'm Chris Baker. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go to buymeacoffee.com if you want to support the show. Check out my novel, Escape from the Village. Thank you, Eric Brakey. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.